Today on The State of Us, teens' distress might be worse than it looks. Eliminate honors classes to fix equity disparities. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, Mr. Lance Jackson. Today, we're looking at schools cutting honors classes to boost equity, but they're facing a backlash, both from parents and teachers. We'll look at the merits of that, but first we're going to discuss how teens' distress may be worse than it looks. You probably remember taking some kind of survey at some point in high school. The administrators informed you that the answers would be confidential, but if you're somebody that doesn't automatically trust authority, like perhaps our friendly redneck liberal, you wouldn't 100% be confident of that.
So what's the accuracy of taking these surveys in school, right?
Right.
Is kind of the point the author's trying to make.
Studies have typically shown that only about 1% or fewer of respondents claiming to have used non-existent drugs. This is one of the ways that they control now for falsehoods on tests is they will actually put in fake drugs that don't really exist, and see if students will say that they've used that or not. So that they know that when students are indicating use of other drugs, and consistently the ones that admit to using a drug that doesn't exist and can't be used is about 1%. Although the surveys are conducted at schools, roughly 5% of those ages 14 to 17 aren't in school. Overall, 16-year-olds not in school have an elevated chance of exposure to sort of risks the CDC is attempting to measure. So the big thing here is that basically what we've learned, right, is that if we look back at 2009, the percentage of high school students who in the past year experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, males were right around 18, 19%, females at 32%. And then we fast forward to 2021, males went from 18% up to just shy of 30%, and females went from 32% to just shy of 60%. So those are big jumps. Basically, what we're learning is, okay, well, yes, what we're seeing in terms of the surveys being done in school are an accurate reflection of the students in school. But the point of this article is, how is teens' distress worse than it looks? The teens that are the most distressed and the most in trouble aren't being captured in these surveys because they're not in school. It
totally makes sense, because I have been a part as a student and as the teacher giving those surveys out. And inevitably the question comes up, are you sure, Mr. Jackson, nobody's going to look at this? And I said, all I can tell you is that's what I was told. I said, I'm not going to look at it. And I was told nobody's going to look at it. I was told I'm going to put them in this envelope and all the envelopes are going to go to some testing site, blah, blah, blah. So again, that doesn't mean they answered them honestly. And, just because you gave it to third period on a Tuesday in November, what percentage of your student population was absent? And then with the number of homeschool kids or those kinds of things that don't even have access to these information, yeah, it's logical when you stop to think about it that the numbers we've all been talking about with anxiety and depression among young people is even higher than what the reported data is showing us.
High school retention rates have improved since 2000, but many teens aren't in class to take the survey. The percentage of U.S. teens aged 16 to 19 who aren't in school and aren't high school graduates in 2000 was 11%. Today, that's down to 4%. However, while that sounds good, and it is good, and that, quote unquote, retention is higher, there's two big glaring things here that I think are not captured in this. So what happens to the ones that turned 20 and then dropped out? Well, they were retained until they were 19. So we kept them in school longer, but the end result wasn't any different. And the other big thing, obviously, which you already sort of mentioned, Lance, is the chronic absenteeism has been on the rise, especially in impoverished districts across the country for the past 20 years. So they're technically being retained in school. They're technically going to school, but the likelihood that they're not at school on any given day, and that the students who aren't there on the day of a survey are most likely the students that are experiencing chronic absenteeism,
Right.
which are also the students that are at the most risk for this. So again, back to that whole point of the individuals that are the most likely to score or indicate that they've felt this way are probably not taking the survey, either because they're not in school that day or they're not in school at all.
And public schools don't want this information out, but I will just tell you that in many states, they are paid based on the number of students they have on their roll. So it encourages them to keep students on the roll,
Even if they don't show up.
even if they're not showing up until after they get their state money. The district that I taught in my entire life did just that. Well, we can't take this student off the roll. The kids are all telling me they're living with grandma in another state. Well, yeah, but we haven't had a request for their information to another school district, so we're going to keep them on. But then mysteriously on October 1st, all these names would be taken off of our classroom list. Why? Because October 1st was the date that the local school district collected money from the state based on their enrollment. And so public schools don't want you to know that, but to that point of the number of students who aren't filling out these surveys to be tested, that is done because in many cases, schools get more money to operate. Now, the flip side of that is, well, the schools say we need the money so that we can service the kids that are here. Okay. I mean, that's fair, but understand that's the way the system is set up. Maybe we need to take a look at how schools are funded, but that's an issue for another day.
The percentage of high school students in the past year who seriously considered attempting suicide: in 2009, males sat at about 10%, females sat at about 17%. Today, or 2021, the most recent data available, 30% of females and about 15% of males seriously have considered suicide in the past year.
Well, and if you have 10% of the population that didn't take the survey, then you need to add, and I know you don't like to do that, but to the point of the article, that it's even worse, that if you just go apples for apples and take the percentage of the students who took it and 30% of females said they were suicidal, then the number of females who didn't take it, take 30% of that number, and you would add it to that overall number, which would give you even more young people that feel that way. Or to your point of earlier in the article, those students who are not showing up to school tend to be more suicidal than those students who are getting some support from being at school. So then you make that number even higher, which means the issue that we're dealing with among our young people is worse than we even anticipated.
And see, we record suicides differently. So one of the things is sometimes people are surprised because when you think about suicide, of course, that's a warning sign, but the link between thinking about it and following through isn't as clear as we might imagine. Despite high rates of young females thinking about suicide, the rates of suicide are actually significantly higher among young males. And I would say here's where, again, the data connects to the highest percentage of those 16 to 19-year-olds not in school are males, not females. They're more likely to be dropouts, and therefore they're not part of what gets captured in this numbers. And I think that's an important item too, because it's like, well, we do measure total number of suicides because when somebody dies, we can list the cause of death and we measure that. But then it's like, well, why do these numbers look like females are more at risk, but we see more males, who are actually following through on it? Well, I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, that seems like that would be one of the reasons, is that we're not capturing that data. So, and there's a lot of reasons. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only one, but the article goes on to say it would be nice, but alas, wishful thinking if the numbers were wrong and it meant we didn't have to worry. Teen years are never easy, but many of the things that makes those years stressful are especially acute right now. And I feel like we've been banging the drum for a few years, but I'm not sure that it's gotten a lot better. One of those is social media. It continues to be, despite some actions that social media companies have taken, it continues to be, I think, a major cause of distress for teens. And we did that show not that long ago, Lance, about the different social medias that impact different students more heavily. One of the reasons that we see that suicide and depression rates higher among the females than the males, thinking about suicide, not actual rate of suicide among females, is because they typically spend more time on Instagram, which is image and social media, or is image and lifestyle comparison based more so than something like video games, which tend to be more dominated by males, where you're playing but talking via voice to other friends in a sort of cooperative team setting.
As we've talked about this, my fear, what happens, as you said, we've talked about this for multiple years, that people start to tune it out because they've heard about it so often. Yeah, here we go, another story about teens struggling. And so my fear is that as this problem is getting worse, more and more people are starting to become numb to the numbers and to the discussion. As an example, the war in Ukraine, it happened the first 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Everybody's just like, oh my gosh, it's all in there. Now every night it's on the news. But how many people are still as adamant about their feelings towards it, following it closely, reading all the reports? Yes, there are those of us that are still doing that, but I would think that the numbers have fallen off after the first 2 months.
Which is understandable. I mean, we atrophy and then start to ignore things because it's like, well, we've just gotten used to it. It's just kind of a way of life. And we see that all the time in society. So I think it's important that we keep it at the forefront, but also realize that it's probably worse than we think it is, which should be all the more reason that it's all the more pressing that we do something substantive about it. And we are going to talk about what some of those solutions might be later in the show, but we do want to take an opportunity to also talk about another thing that can be a source of stress, but not just for students, also for parents: honors classes. Those coveted higher level classes that can make you look better to a college potentially, and separate students from other students. The question is eliminating honor classes the way to go? Some school districts have tried it. Have they seen success? Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back. Turning to California, a group of parents stepped to a lectern Tuesday night, according to the Wall Street Journal, at a school board meeting in this middle-class Los Angeles area city to push back against a racial equity initiative. The high school, they argued, should reinstitute honors English classes that were eliminated because they didn't enroll enough Black and Latino students. The district earlier this year replaced the honors classes at Culver City High School with uniform courses that officials say will ensure students of all races receive an equal, rigorous education. These parents disagreed. Quote, "We really feel equity means offering opportunities to students of diverse backgrounds, not taking away opportunities for advanced education and study," Jonah Shaman, a Culver City parent who helped spearhead the effort, said in the run-up to the meeting. The parental pushback in Culver City mirrors resistance that has taken place in Wisconsin, Rhode Island, elsewhere in California over the last year in response to schools stripping away the honors designation on some high school classes. School districts doing away with honors classes argue that students who don't take those classes from a young start see themselves in a different tier and come to think that they aren't capable of enrolling in advanced placement classes that help with college admission. Black and Latino students are underrepresented in AP enrollment and in the majority of states, according to the Education Trust, which is a nonprofit that studies equity in education. So in other words, we've detected that there's this problem, right? Which is that advanced classes tend to underrepresent in a school district students of color. So the answer that some school districts are trying is, well, we'll just do away with honors classes.
Where do you want me to go with this?
There's a lot of different directions.
I've got a lot of voices in my head right now.
Well, let's start with, I think what I want to help guide people with is we want to answer kind of this question about this debate, but there's a bigger answer that we're going to get to about maybe why this doesn't matter at all. It matters because right now we've decided it matters. And I don't mean me and Lance. I mean, societally, we've decided that honors classes, right, advanced placement matters. So if we're going to continue to decide that they matter, how do you solve this? I mean, is the solution that you just do away with honors classes or something else?
Well, I guess my first comment will be, in my 30 years of education, I faced this dilemma 3 times. There were 3. So this is not.
So once a decade
this is not a new argument. Okay.
We revisit it every now and
everybody
again.
can say, oh, the woke generation, and this is why we're dealing with this. No, it's been, well, and I will go, my 13 years in the school system. So in 45 years, I went through this 3 times, either as a student or as a teacher. We're going to have honors classes. We're going to take honors classes away. We're going to tier the classes. We're not going to tier the classes. We're going to have homogeneous grouping, all of that. This is an ongoing thing. This has nothing to do with liberal conservative values. This is something that education does all the time.
Goes through phases.
It is. This is just one of those things. That being said, I believe the majority of it falls on the teacher. Because whether you give me an AP class, which I taught, honors classes, which I taught, general ed classes, which I taught, and inclusion classes, which I taught, it has to do with what I taught. Now, the only class that I taught really differently was the AP class, because there was an AP test at the end of the year. And so, but my class, I did what other teachers wouldn't do. I would accept anyone into my class. Every other AP class at the school where I taught had standards for students to enter the class. At my AP class, I said, anybody who wants to take it can come in. I don't care what your grades are. I don't care what your GPA was. I don't care what your class standing was. If you want to sit in here and try to do the work, or you want to just sit in here and listen to the discussions and partake in the discussions, you can be in my AP class. And I was allowed to do that. And lo and behold, guess what? I had more kids in my AP class than English, science, biology, all the different AP classes that we offered. Now, did all those students do well? No, they didn't do well. But my argument was they learned more by being in there than they did by not being in there. And then anecdotally, one of the things that I always hung my hat on is that when we had honors and what we called regular history classes, I had students who were in my regular honor, who didn't get to go to honors classes. They were in my regular class, and they took a test, history test, at a state-funded school, and repeatedly they would score the highest in our county on this test. And it was like, well, that's one of your regular ed kids. That's not your honors. Yeah, I don't teach honors. I teach regular ed. That was at the time in my career where I was, I hadn't gone up the hierarchy yet, because we can talk about that too, how generally the honors classes are taught by the more experienced teachers. So here I was as the newbie teacher, and my regular ed kids were going on to score higher than anybody in the county, the 5 schools in the county. My regular ed students were scoring higher than anybody else on the history test. So it's how you present the material. That's why I say it's on the teacher. You can make this work. One of the arguments in this article, if you go online and read it at thestateofus.org, is that, well, the teachers tend to dummy it down to meet the lower level kids. Well, that's the teacher's fault. You don't have to do that. You can hold your standard, and then everybody, they will rise up to the standard or they won't. Okay. I had a special ed student whose grandfather called me and said, he is going to stay after school with you, because I am not going to let him flunk American history. I'm an ex-Marine. He needs to know American history. And so this young man spent every day in my class an extra 30 minutes for 3 weeks. And at that point, he went from an F to an A. And then for the rest of the year, he amazed the kids in the honors class that I let him transfer to. His grades were so good that he was quoting things and they're like, isn't he? And I said, what? He's a great student, isn't he? Again, what is your expectation as a teacher? And I understand there are students in there who have limited capabilities. But if your standard for that, if you lower the standard, that's the level they're going to reach. You must keep your standards high in the classroom. So that's my take on this whole honors, AP, whatever. I think we should be pushing everybody into the hardest class possible to allow them to learn the most material that they're capable of learning.
The three things that came to mind while you were talking, Lance, is communication, filtering, and standards. And I think these are all systematic problems that lead to the issue. I 100% agree that if we're underrepresenting minority groups in, if a school district, say, has, 20% Black students, but honors classes are only representing 2%, okay, right? That we need to, what should we do about this? Well, the easy answer has been, I'm not saying it's easy to eliminate honors classes, but the obvious answer has been, well, we just won't have honors classes and then we won't have this problem. That is an answer, but I'm not sure that is going to improve the educational outcomes of all students. In fact, it may lower overall education outcomes. That said, these three things come to mind. Communication. What are we, and when I say we, parents, teachers, and a big one, at least in the state of Ohio, school counselors, directing students on classes to take? What are we communicating to them? Honors classes are for smart students. Well, I'm not smart, so I'm not going to take one. Why are we communicating that? The filtering component. I'm not really sure that you're a good fit for an honors class. Maybe you should take a gen ed class. Why are we doing that? We're doing a lot of things on the front end. They talk about feeling like they shouldn't take it. I don't think that has hardly anything to do with the class. It has way more to do with what the people who is in their sphere of influence when classes are being selected are telling them about what classes are. And if the message is not, it's going to be hard, but I think you can do it. If the message is, it's going to be really hard, are you sure you want to do this? Those are that's a small change in what you're saying, but that's a huge difference in whether or not I want to take a class. If this school counselor who supposedly knows a lot of stuff, or this teacher who supposedly knows a lot of stuff, and they're looking at my thing and they say, it's going to be really hard, are you sure you want to take that? I'm probably going to sit there and be like, well, yeah, maybe not. That sounds, and you don't want to lie to them and tell them it's going to be easy, but it's going to be challenging, but I believe you can do it, if you work hard, and it could help you out later. A whole different perspective then on whether or not that class is being selected. So 100% agree with, we have to be very conscious of how are we framing these. And the last thing you said is standards. Keep the standards high. I hate the word standards in education. Standard what? What standard do we want? Maybe we should talk about goals. What do we want to strive for? What do we want to aim for? We may not get those things, but we ought to have high goals. Standards brings to mind the lowest common denominator. What do we want to make sure everybody knows? Why is that the thing that we decided to start measuring by? Well, we're going to make sure everybody knows at least this, instead of we're going to try to get everybody to know this. And if we fall short, that's okay. But that's what we're aiming for. And that's not what we do. There are teachers who do that, but from a system standpoint, that's not what we do.
If you were running a business and you're hiring people and the applicant said, well, what's the minimum that I have to do to stay hired at this company and draw a paycheck? Is that the person you're going to put on the line? Is that the person you're going to put in the front office to make phone calls to your wholesalers?
Whether or not we realize it, the difference between a standard and a goal is an important thing. And saying that you have to do this minimum thing versus we want you to achieve this thing, is a huge fundamental difference, because the only thing the kid gets is, in order for me to do well and people to be happy with me, I have to meet this thing. To meet this thing.
The teachers as well. It's not just the students, it's the teachers as well.
It's the
and anecdotally, back in the 1960s, there was a study done by the University of California at Berkeley that went into San Francisco public schools, and they picked out certain teachers and certain classes and told them, you have been specially put together because you are the best teacher in 5th grade and you are the 20 best students in the 5th grade. So therefore, we've given the best teacher, the best students. You should achieve dramatically better than everyone else. And guess what? At the end of the year, they did. And then they released the rest of the story. And that was that teacher's name was pulled out of a hat. And those 20 students had already been randomly selected and put in her class. But they went in and told them, you're the best teacher, you're the 20 best students. They all worked really hard because they were told that they should achieve great things. So they did. They were just picked by random. So the whole point of what you said, we want you to reach for these goals, not only to the students, but to the teachers.
We ought to have a relentless pursuit of more, better, instead of get to what the standard is and then push them on. Some people don't meet it, and then they're behind where the minimum is that we said they needed to be. So now they are really far behind. And if we had said the goal's up here and we're not going to talk about what the lowest common denominator is, we're going to talk about what we're all aiming for. Now, if I fall short of that, chances are I'm well above what the standard is anyway, because I was aiming for something higher. So even though I missed, I was way better off than if I had aimed for the low bar.
And go back to my student who was in a special class, whose grandfather decided he needed to know American history, who ended up teaching the honors class, right? Because what did we do? We had a goal. Grandpa had a goal for this young man.
We're going to get to here.
And we worked hard, and that young man wasn't allowed to go home, had to stay in my class after school, until he achieved the level that Grandpa was satisfied with, and then enjoyed it so much that he then began to teach the students that supposedly were brighter than he was or more capable than he was. Why? Because we didn't stop at the standard.
So what do we do about all this? Well, we talk some about what we do about the honors class thing. I mean, I think the obvious answer is we have to fix our communication, fix the way that we filter and set expectations for students, and we have to quit being obsessed with standards and become more obsessed with objectives, goals, things to strive for. But what do we do about holistically the distress that all of this causes, and some of that we talked about in the first segment? How do we improve the mental well-being of all of our students so that they can reach for those higher goals, so that they feel like it is possible? Keep it here on the State Bus. We'll be right back. We talked about it recently. I'm totally open to our listeners changing my mind. People should know, Lance can speak to it. It's not very often that Justin just comes out and says, this is what we ought to do. But it should be illegal for anybody under the age of 16 to be on social media. It ought to be against the law, and we ought to punish parents fiercely who enable it to take place. And we should maybe not punish parents, but punish the media outlets and put the onus, because people always ask, well, how are you going to enforce this? I don't know, but let's make the fines incredibly hefty. Let's make the punishment incredibly hefty on the social media giants for not enforcing it. Leave the enforcement to them. They built the damn thing. They figure out how to abide by it. They're going to say, well, we don't know. How are we going to? I don't care. I don't care. Here is the punishment for you, the company that built this lovely software, if you can't figure out a reliable way to keep these people off your platform. And if we find out that you've let them on and that you're not doing due diligence, here's what's going to happen to you.
I don't disagree with that. And they have the best and brightest minds, so they should be able to figure it out.
Right. I mean, these are our titans of industry. They've come up with these multi-billion-dollar organizations that have turned the world upside down and totally changed society. You're telling me they can't figure out how to keep people under the age of 16 off of social media? No, of course they can. Of course they could figure that out if they were really interested in it, but they're not, because they'd like to keep making money, and they know that the sooner that you hook these kids, the harder it becomes to step away from it.
I'm going to take a different tact, and I'm not saying your way is wrong. I think that is a very good thing. But why are kids turning to social media? Well, because obviously there's a lack of something else. There's something not being met in their life. And where do they spend a large part of their life? And that's in school. And I think what we need to do is we need to revamp the way we train people to be teachers, because unfortunately, we do it, I think, in a way that harms young people. We train teachers. Teachers aren't bad. I've been in roomful after roomful of teachers. Teachers are some of the most empathetic, caring individuals I've ever met. They want what's best for young people. But what has been driven in the teacher's head is to teach the material that is in front of them. And I think what we need to train teachers to do is to get to know their students. Because if they know their students as humans, and they allow their students to get to know them as humans, and there's a trust level in the classroom among the teacher and the students, and then through the administration and the teachers and the administration and the support staff and the teachers and the students. If that trust is there, a lot of this anxiety and depression will go away, and we will be able to reach those goals, not standards. Okay. And I just tell this from my own way. When students feel comfortable and cared about, they will do work that otherwise they will not do. And then your job as a teacher becomes easier. But unfortunately, from the top down, the state, through the administration, to the teachers, to the kids, we have to meet these standards. So by God, I don't like teaching this subject. I don't this way, and I don't want, but you're going to be tested on this. And so we all have to pass the test, because otherwise our school is going to be denied money, blah, blah, blah. But if you would just get to know that Johnny doesn't get to eat breakfast every morning, Judy does Taekwondo 4 nights a week, not in any school program, or Susie's in the ballet company in the largest city, in 30 miles away, and she practices every night. Stevie goes to swim at 4:00 every morning. You know those things, right? You know that they come from a rough environment, a good environment, and you have those conversations. Those young people, even if they don't like the material that you're teaching them, they will do the work because they know you care about them, and they trust you to only give them something that they need to do and that they need to know. And if you do that, then you're back to reaching what Justin called goals instead of what the state calls standards.
Right now, we're trying to accomplish standards. We need to be striving to meet goals. And I think that's the fundamental thing that we're talking about. The complication in all of that is, even if you make that switch, but you're still putting in the hands of young people devices that give them access to an unlimited amount of information, basically younger and younger and younger, before they've had those critical conversations with adults that they can trust in the education system and at home. What do you expect to happen? They're being exposed to the atrocities of the world with no frame of reference on how to process or deal with that. And even if they wanted to, who are they going to turn to? A student recently came to the youth center who basically is getting straight A's in school, and schools have figured out how to suspend 2 or 3 times in a 6-month period, and is, a student with some special needs, but this is a kid that's clearly capable of getting things done. We don't seem to have problems, but here's the fundamental difference. He likes spending time with us. He does not like spending time at school. When our teachers tell him, I know you're stressed right now, but we're going to look into that, and we're going to find out what's going on, and we're going to help this person that you're worried about, he believes them. So guess what? He wants to be here because this is a place you feel safe. This is a place where you feel like you can trust people. And I go to school and they tell me that I'm bad and the way that I behaved was no good, and they kick me out and they tell me that I'm dangerous. I mean, why would you want to be at a place like that?
What we have to do is convince everybody else that look at what we're doing and it's being successful, and it doesn't hold back. And what people always are, well, what about those really, it doesn't hurt the really good students, because these really good students have anxiety as well. They have anxiety. Are they going to get an A on the test? Are they going to keep their grade point average? So they get into school that their parents want them to, or that they need to get in to be able to do what they have, stress and anxiety as well. And if you have this kind of environment, they will achieve even better than they're currently achieving, even though they are high achievers right now. They'll learn even more. So it works for everybody. It's not just bringing up the bottom. It also raises the roof to the highest level, because you're going to make that goal. If they reach that goal, then you just reset the goal. You don't stop. So it helps everybody.
Why do we have the show today, Lance?
Well, because we work at a place called True Chat. And here at True Chat, they have a mission. And that mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've done that today as we talk about society and young people and the best way to get the most out of it. Because let's face it, folks, if we don't take care of our young people, there won't be a society. Okay. That's just the way it goes. Some of us are going to die off and people are going to replace us. And if we don't replace ourselves with better people, then this society will cease to exist. And I don't think we want that for our children and our grandchildren. So pass the word around, talk about this show. People say it sounds like something that I'd like to get involved with and converse with. Then tell them as a podcast, they can find The State of Us on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. Those same episodes are heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio shows across the country. I do want to mention, Lance, that if anybody has another idea, please send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org. We would like to hear from you, especially the whole thing with social media is I would be interested for somebody to give a cohesive argument that says the benefits of allowing social media under the age of 16 are outweighed by the consequences of it, or you know what I'm saying? Yeah, that there is a good reason, that there are more good reasons and benefits to allow it than to prevent it. Because I think I have become convinced that I've not seen evidence to the contrary. Is there reasons that it's good? Yes. Are there more reasons that it's bad? Yes, I think so. And unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all, but in society, we unfortunately do have to sometimes make those decisions that are a one size fits all in the interest of the 90 to 95% of all students who would benefit from not having it in their lives. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to producer Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.